Welcome to Mershman Seeds Cup of Joe. On this episode, Joe, Turk, and Ben recap sessions they attended at the IPSA conference in Indiana this week. Ben discusses red crown rot and how to identify it in your field. Turk talks about market volatility and the current Drought Monitor. Joe talks about the future of the world demand, technology, and the potential of deflation in the future.
Hi, this is Joe Mershman. Welcome to Mershman Seeds Cup of Joe. Today we have our regulars. We have Turk and Ben, and we'll start with Ben.
Yeah, so this week we spent some time at the Independent Professional Seed Association. That's kind of a, why don't you describe what what IPSA is, Joe?
Sure, it's a group of independent seed companies. Actually, there's 125 members and 100 associate members. Associates are suppliers to the seed industry. It was started back in 1989 to network and work together on things where we don't compete. So this meeting is kind of like a retreat for us because they bring in some of the best speakers in the country to talk about current agriculture situations as well as economics. So we're going to talk about that, and of course, Ben, you attended most of the agronomic sessions, and I know you found out some real interesting information.
Yeah, so one of the ones that I went to was a talk given by Dr. Jason Bond from Southern Illinois University, Carbondale. That is a pretty hot spot for a lot of where we have a very high concentration of sales. And one of the things that he talked about, and we alluded to a little bit in previous podcasts here, is this red crown rot in soybeans. And one of the projects that's going on right now, it's actually in year 2 of the phase, is this gathering information of where the red crown rot is distributed at. So last year they found in Pittsfield, Illinois, which is pretty far north, for this southern, typically this southern disease, this red crown rot of soybean, has traveled a lot further north than what they originally thought, because soil temperatures have to be from 77 to 86 degrees with lots of moisture for this disease to come by, or for this disease to establish itself. But there's a lot of things that we've learned since that last podcast, or at least that Dr. Jason Bond explained to us. So I kind of wanted to share some of that stuff. So like I said, this disease is distributed in 15 counties, basically from a little bit further south than where West Point's located in the state of Illinois, further on south, but there's 15 counties that are pretty widely distributed. And in those 15 counties, it's kind of like when we first find resistant populations of like water hemp, it's probably in a lot more counties. They just haven't identified this disease because it looks so much like sudden death or stem canker. The disease, the symptoms of the disease is intraveinal chlorosis that looks almost identical to sudden death, but one of the signs of the disease, which is the actual pathogen that's attacking it, at the base of the root, if there is these little red pustules, and I can throw some pictures up here, there's these little red pustules that if the environment is humid enough or wet enough, you'll see these pustules showing up. One thing that I learned from Dr. Jason Bond is this disease actually produces sclerotinia, which is something that we find in white mold. That is a overwintering fruiting body of a fungal pathogen, which means that this disease is here to stay. It's something that has very good survivability in cooler climates, and it's something that the growers that have this in these fields are going to fight for a long time. There's lots of research, but one of the first things we have to do is identify how widespread that is, and I'm sure there's industry and universities that are already working on different ways to try to offset how this works. With sudden death, we have the ability to put Olevo or Saltro on our product because the infection happens so early in the season. The plant imbibes those 2 different active ingredients and basically keeps the fusarium from attacking the roots. With this red crown rot, the disease infection happens so much later. Any seed applied treatments are no longer in effect because that active ingredient has dissolved, or there's not near as high enough of a active out there at that time. So
How much damage can red crown rot do to a field? How much yield can it take away?
It's extremely comparable to a heavy infestation of sudden death.
So it could be 50, 60% if it really bad infestation.
Correct.
Any idea how we can manage it?
Tillage is always an option that, from a theoretical standpoint, they don't have any studies that back that up, but anytime that you can bury pathogens deeper in the soil so they aren't subject to the humidity and the moisture increase that soil needs is positive. But the problem being with that's sclerotinia, it has a long survivability, so anytime you do tillage, you may pull that product back up. So it'd be something where you could bury it once, and you'd have to go to a no-till situation to not fight that. And that is all in theory, but we don't have any disease back, or we don't have any research backing that.
Does the sclerotinia emerge in other crops as well, so a rotation could help?
Rotation does not help because the host range is huge.
Okay.
The host range for this disease is a very widespread. They talked about blueberries and a whole bunch of other different host ranges in some of these articles, and I'll attach everything that I looked up prior or after the before we aired this episode here. But they talk about wide host ranges.
Corn and wheat rotation would not help you?
Not necessarily. So that's something that we need to be looking out for, because a problem identified is always a solution. It's something I'm going to be watching. I know that we had a few fields in southern Illinois, maybe a little bit further north than southern Illinois, where I was getting pictures on and looked like sudden death. Wasn't treated with Saltro, but it's something that we're going to dive heavier into and get a lot more. We'll probably be sending a lot more samples to Southern Illinois University, because Dr. Bond is wildly aware of the problem that we're having here.
Thanks for the good news, Ben.
I do what I can.
At least you know what they always say: a problem identified is a blessing. In other words, once we know we have the problem, then we can start doing something to correct it. It's those problems you don't know about that can really cause you a lot of problems. So
correct. He also talked a little bit about root knot nematodes and a whole wide host range, and that's something also that I'll be looking a lot more closely at. Root knot is spreading. It's kind of like this red crown rot in soybeans. It looks like the disease is following rivers, main river channels, which makes sense because it's most devastating in sandier soils. So anywhere where you have bottom grounds that have sandy soils, as far north as Quincy, they have found in 2021, they have found heavy enough infestations that it's a yield limiting factor. Good news with root knot is we have an ability to fight back against that disease. We have resistant cultivars. Hopefully we'll have more in different maturity ranges to help combat that. Right now we have for sale it's actually in seed production this year, but for the 2023 sale season, we will have a bean called our Charleston 2349 root knot that is like 102% over test average. So it's not only a great bean in a normal environment, it is a phenomenal bean in these sandier environments that can handle the stress and keep the galls and the root knots from establishing on these soybean roots.
Well, that's great. That's great.
So something I'll be paying a little bit more attention to, something that when we have beans in sandier situations, we're probably going to be pulling more cyst tests and wide variety of cyst tests, because the lance, lesion, stunt, dagger, needle are all playing more of a prolific role, as we aren't using soil applied insecticide and nematicides like Capture. Mm-hmm. Guys have kind of gone away from that. They've gone away from the planter box applied strategies, and I think that's really probably setting us back in the lighter soil types, a little bit heavier than what most would think. Mm-hmm. So it was that portion. Dr. Bond did a wonderful job talking about some of the trials and tribulations that growers are facing in the southern half of Illinois. So
seed treatments are kind of they're in for a fight anyway. I think you went to a seed treatment meeting, didn't you, Joe, at the IPSA? Did they have, what was their comments?
Well, it was more about the industry regulations than it was about specific products. But I do know that in general, seed treatments are going to be taking on more of a biological lean as we head into the future, just because of registrations and different things. So,
Endangered Species Act
and all this stuff. So, there's going to be an explosion of biologicals coming, and working through that whole process. And do you have the right environment consistently to have those biologicals develop? So they'll be looking in nature to fix some of these problems as opposed to hard chemistry.
Right.
Turk?
I just going to make a comment on the markets. Again, pretty volatile week this last week, and markets up and markets down, and it really kind of depends on wheat. It depends on the news coming out of the Ukraine and Russia and what's developing there. Huge moves in wheat, both up and down. Corn's kind of and soybeans are kind of in limbo here and lost and trying to follow or trying to go the other way. But in general, they're more stable than what the wheat market is right now. But having said that, there's an acreage battle going on for corn and soybean acres, and South America continues to be on the dry side in some areas. And so as the combines start rolling more and more down there, we will start learning more and more about what their final crop is. But like everything else, we maybe have overestimated what the dry situation is down there. It's like in the U.S. last year, nobody thought we was going to have the crop we had, and come to find out that we had a much better crop than we thought. So that may be the case down there. But it is still going to. We know they're short. It's just how short are they? So that's going to have effect on that. February is also the month for price establishment for federal crop prices, and so we're in. That's some good news. We're going into that price discovery period with fairly good corn and soybean prices. Corn in the 560, 570 range, and soybeans in the 1260, 1270 range. That's November and December corn. So the whole month of February, they will average that, and that'll be our spring price election. So and I think there's some room for that to even improve yet in the month of February. So.
Yeah, everything I've read recently says that Ukraine, if there'd be a war of some type, they export a lot of wheat and corn, and we could see explosions in those markets. So, the markets may tell us in advance of what's going to happen. With wheat going down, that may indicate that they think cooler heads will prevail. So we'll have to watch that, but that could easily put $1.50, $2 on these prices on corn and wheat, is what some folks say, if it's an all-out battle. So that's the volatility that's in this market right now.
One of the things they talked about there is the fact that this is all about food and nothing else. The Russia wanting to get into it, Ukraine. Ukraine used to be part of the USSR, and so they still think that it is part of the USSR, and so they want that wheat and corn that the Ukraine is producing right now, and if something does happen, it could explode these markets, and we'll be the preferred provider of those products, and
everybody's going to move away from sourcing their products from them just because they don't know what's going to happen. If you need corn or wheat, you're not going to contact
I think that's already
Ukraine.
happening to a certain extent.
Yep. So volatility is where we're at right now, and managing that's going to be tough. It's going to be tough for farmers. Anything else, Turk?
I just wanted to mention the Drought Monitor. Keep an eye on the Drought Monitor. Western U.S. continues to be very, very dry, and Eastern U.S. the Eastern Corn Belt looks pretty good, but there is a dry spot developing in North and South Carolina, and Elwin Taylor always used to say watch North and South Carolina in February, and that'll give you an indication of what you could expect in the Eastern Corn Belt later in the season. So keep an eye on those.
So
that area.
If that drought expands in the Carolinas, then they could spell for a dry summer here in the Corn Belt and the Eastern
Corn Belt.
Corn Belt. Mm-hmm. And then we're already dry in the Western Corn Belt. So
Blue Water Outlook did say that the La Nina is weakening, and we could shift into El Nino pretty hard after early spring. So that would match as well.
Okay. Well, never a dull moment for farmers, right?
Oh, it's something new every day.
I attended a couple sessions that I thought were interesting, and one of them was the economic outlook, and by a guy named Vikram Mancharmani, and I just hit some of the highlights that were a little bit different than what I've heard before. First of all, he says China's overbuilt, and that's kind of matches up with a lot of things that are out there that their waning population of younger people, which is going to be detrimental to their growth because of their one-child policy is finally catching up with them. In fact, it may be already hurting them right now. They just don't have the workers. As we know, energy alternatives are growing. The focus is on world climate change, and it's now considered to be in the crisis mode right now. Again, the demographics of the industrialized countries are getting older, and when you get older, you don't spend as much. When you're younger, you spend a lot more. So economies that are aging, in particular China, Japan, U.S. still has the millennials, and so we still have strong spending yet, but that's going to affect world demand. And technology continues to move forward is able to adapt to more supply. So what really struck me was that he was worried about deflation. And what was deflation is lower prices. And we were all kind of almost fell off the chair, because everybody's talking about inflation. Here he's talking about deflation, and his reasons to think in the next 3 to 5 years that this thing's all going to fix itself. But during COVID, everybody was at home. Okay, they couldn't go anywhere. We were on lockdown. So what'd they do? Got on Amazon.com. They bought stuff, and then of course now you see this big supply chain thing for stuff. If anything you need goods wise, it's all tied up. Well, the sectors that suffered were the service industries, the restaurants, theme parks, vacation, cruise lines, all that stuff. So we shifted all our money from entertainment and those areas, and we shifted it all into goods. And it said when that money, and then we had all this COVID money in our hands, when that money goes away and savings are going down, then what's a factory do when everybody wants your stuff? You gear up, you build, and then what happens when you oversupply? Well, then you lower the price. So will that happen? I don't know, but he thinks that deflation is very, very likely, and so we need to watch that. And that's I've not heard that before. And then he talked about basically we are in war with China right now, not a physical shooting war, but from the standpoint of trade, space, tech communications, arms. So there's going to be, he thinks the world's going to start choosing sides. It's going to be Russia, China, and Iran against United Kingdom, Australia, the U.S., Canada, and countries around the world are going to have to decide which side of the fence they want to get on. I mean, there's definitely two emerging superpowers. And the other thing, too, that they talked about was...
I know it was interesting, he made a mention of the potential for cyber war.
I don't have real good notes on that, Turk, if you want to expand on
that. He just said that, as the U.S. starts supporting Iran in this conflict, one way that they can do something to hurt us is cyber war on the U.S. without sending, doesn't take anything other than internet.
Yeah, it'd be one of the first signs.
Yeah. And
then we're seeing it right now. The United States is under attack, definitely, from the Russians and ransomware and all this stuff. We know companies, company after company that's getting caught in that trap. Mm-hmm. But anyhow, they talked about carbon credits too, and it looks like it's real. And the United States agriculture could lead. The issue, though, is some of the problems we have is India and China. I mean, whatever we save over here, they're expanding their economies, and they're going to be 90% of the problem. In other words, we can do all we can over here to sequester carbon, but you're going to have India and China just offsetting ours plus more. So it's going to be a real problem. There's also another speaker that talked about energy and kind of laid out the facts on talking about going to electric cars and all that, and what the math is. And basically he said that energy, to be the ideal energy, it has to be cheap, has to be abundant, has to be reliable, it has to be pure, universal, available, economically friendly, and also a supply that's non-disruptive and safe. And he made it real clear that fossil fuels are not going away. It is literally a policy change that is saying that we're going to have all this electric by 2030, 2035, even 2050. And he went through the facts. And starting back in the 1740s to 1885, wood was our primary source of power, for heating our homes, building steam for steam engines. And it talks about density. And then we went to coal, and we stayed in the coal cycle for about 91 years, and we ended up in oil. So in other words, what he was trying to say is that basically to change a source of energy, it takes about 100 years, 90 to 100 years. And to expect that we're going to go all electric cars and all electric everything in 20 or 30 years would cost astronomically. And part of the reason is because the elements that they're needed to make batteries and whatnot are not readily available. They have to be mined. And we have those elements in our country, cobalt and lithium. However, it's very hard to get a mining permit to even mine them. And in mining, as you know, is very, very dirty. So, just to let you know how some of the policy changes, California banned internal combustion engines in 2035. No longer can be sold. Great Britain 2030, Norway 2025, and China has said 50% new energy vehicles by 2035. EU in general 2035. They're banning the internal combustion engine. In Quebec, Canada, which is one of the provinces, 2035 for the internal combustion. In other words, in 2035 they say you can no longer sell internal combustion engines. And one of the suggestions that is possible is to raise our compression in our existing engines, our new engines, and then use 95 octane rather than 87. It burns cleaner and therefore less. I think it would cut carbon dioxide levels by about a third, and that could be done with using E15 ethanol to raise that octane level. And that's on the table right now, which could be a step towards these goals, but it's not being considered by our government or most of the governments. So just changing our fuel source to 95 octane and higher compression engines could make a huge difference. So I guess what I took away is it's going to be extremely expensive to make these goals, and where's this money going to come from, and how is the average person going to be able to afford it? We even heard that from the Iowa State economics professor too. He said it takes, Iowa has a 10-year cycle on their vehicles. In other words, if you decide you want to buy an electric vehicle, it'd probably be 10 years, before you would get ready for one. And so just a lot of stuff to talk about, that some of the things that we're hearing on the news and some of the things that we're starting to digest, it's more complicated than that, much more complicated.
One of the things that was really interesting that he said is a 1,000-pound electric vehicle battery required 250 tons of mining activity to get what's needed for that 1,000-pound battery. Yeah. And again, you just think about that. What is that going to do environmentally all by itself?
And he also talked about the regenerative diesel fuel and jet fuel from soybeans and how that could affect the soybean market, which we've talked about. Right now we're at 90 million acres of soybeans, and if we decide that we got to hit this goal of regenerative diesel fuel and jet fuel, we could go to 130 million acres of soybeans, and that would just scratch the demand that's out there. The potential demand, and how that would upset, the balance between corn and soybeans and all the other things. Where's these acres going to come from? So there's just a lot of things that we need to be watching, because agriculture is going to be right in the middle of this thing.
Agriculture is a solution to the problem, and I think the rest of the world is starting to, and our government is starting to understand that.
So anyhow, we'll continue to talk about some of the changes that are coming, try to keep you alert to what some of the experts are saying. But the bottom line is expect a lot of change coming in the next few years and a lot of volatility. And that's the scary thing about being in business or being a farmer. You can do things exactly the same way you did last year. Last year was highly successful, and the next year could be a disaster. So that's the scary part about business and agriculture. Anything else? Well, I know my corny jokes have not been that great. And and I think some of the people are starting to feel sorry for me. So I had Sue and Ray Mankey sent me a couple jokes to help me out. Okay, and Ray is one of my classmates from high school, and I can tell you that some of our activities are still considered classified and have not been. The statute of limitations have not gone off yet. But that's a whole nother story. Okay, but I thought they sent in a couple of good ones, so we'll see what you think. Now, there's some people out there that are afraid to fly, right? It's scary, right? Can be scary for them. Well, there's a new airplane that has been developed that cannot crash. It's made from rubber polymers. It will just bounce. The craft was invented by Boeing. Okay? Yeah, okay. I thought that was pretty good. Yeah. This is really good. This one here I really like. In the Old West, they would mount a lantern on their horse for travel at night. It was the first form of satellite navigation.
Okay, yeah.
That's a good one. That's a good one. Well, thanks, Ray and Sue, for helping us out. And if anybody else has some good corny jokes, please send them on to me. But hopefully all of you and your family are healthy and safe. I know a lot of COVID going around right now. We appreciate your business, and we look forward to seeing you next week. Take care.
Thanks for watching Merchant Seeds Cup of Joe.